The great dome of the Galactic Concord Chamber was designed to impress and to intimidate. Light from a dozen different stars filtered through crystalline panels, casting shifting alien colors across the polished obsidian floor. The air itself hummed with a low frequency, a sound felt in the bones more than heard with the ears, generated by the life support systems maintaining a dozen different atmospheres. In tiered seating that rose like the sides of a giant bowl, sat the representatives of the three most powerful empires in the known galaxy. Their forms were as varied as their worlds. Some were tall and insect-like, with glossy chitin and multifaceted eyes. Others were short and stout, with thick hides and slow, deliberate movements. Still others were almost plant-like, their limbs moving with a gentle, swaying motion. At the very bottom of this bowl, on the flat, central floor, stood a single, simple podium made of a neutral gray metal. It looked small and plain against the grandeur of the chamber. Behind this podium stood three humans. The man in the center was named Jin. He was of average height with dark hair and a calm, still face. He wore a simple, dark uniform without any medals or rank insignia. To his right stood Mira, a woman with sharp, intelligent eyes that moved slowly around the chamber, taking in every detail. To his left stood Tay, a man whose broad shoulders and stern expression suggested a military background. His hands were clasped tightly behind his back and he stood perfectly still like a statue. They had been standing there for nearly an hour, listening. The air was filled with a chaotic symphony of clicks, whistles, deep rumbles, and sibilant hisses. Small floating orbs darted between the delegates, translating the complex languages into earpieces worn by the three humans. They heard trade agreements, territorial disputes, and complex political arguments between the empires. It was a display of power, a reminder of how small and new humanity was in this vast, crowded galaxy. Finally, the representative from the Valerian Empire stood. His name was Kalen. The Valerians were a species of tall, bipedal beings, covered in interlocking plates of a substance that looked like black pearl. He stood a full head taller than Jin, and his movements were sharp and precise. The chamber fell silent. All other arguments stopped when a Valerian spoke. The item of new business, Kalen's voice was translated into a flat, mechanical tone in the human's ears, but the arrogance in his posture was universal. The human species. He did not look at Jin, but addressed the entire assembly. In a remarkably short time, your kind has spread from your home system. You have established colonies in 12 star systems. These systems, by chance or by design, now exist at the precise junction of Valerian, Cygnian, and Cathar space. This expansion can no longer be ignored. The Galactic Concord has tolerated your presence. Now you must integrate. Now Kalen turned his glowing red eyes toward the podium. The Valerian Star Commons offers you a path of order and security. You will join us as a protectorate. Your military vessels will be integrated into our fleets under Valerian command. Your technological databases will be submitted for analysis to ensure they comply with galactic stability protocols. Your colonial governance will be overseen by Valerian administrators. This is the most logical and beneficial course for a young species. He sat down. The silence held for a moment, and then the Cygnian representative rose. Where the Valerians were sharp and militaristic, the Cygnians were sleek and economic. Their representative was a being with smooth gray skin and large dark eyes. The Cygnian hegemony recognizes the unique potential of humanity. The translated voice was smooth, almost friendly. Your species shows a remarkable, if unfocused, ingenuity. We offer integration into our mercantile network. You will retain nominal control of your worlds, but your economy, your trade, and your technological development will be managed by the hegemony. You will prosper, and in turn you will strengthen the whole. It is a symbiotic relationship. Lastly, the Cathar delegate made a sound, a low vibration that made the floor tremble slightly. The Cathar were the oldest of the three empires and the most mysterious. They were large, slow-moving creatures that resembled walking stones. Their translator orb glowed a deep purple. The Cathar Collective offers preservation. Your species will be sheltered. Your worlds will be protected. In return, you will provide a tithe of your population for study and for service. Your unique biological and psychological signature will be added to the Great Archive. You will become a part of something eternal. 3 offers, 3 different forms of slavery. A protectorate was a fancy word for a conquered territory. Economic integration meant they would own every aspect of human life. Preservation meant they would be frozen in time, a living museum exhibit. Every eye, lens, and sensory organ in the massive chamber was now fixed on the three humans at the podium. The air was thick with expectation. They waited for the pleading, the negotiation, the desperate counteroffers. They waited for the humans to reveal their fear. Jin took a small, quiet breath. He leaned forward just slightly toward the microphone on the podium. The entire chamber seemed to lean with him. He looked directly at the tiered seats, his gaze moving slowly from the Valerians to the Cygnians, to the silent Cathar. He did not speak. Instead, he gave a single, slow, deliberate nod. Then he straightened up. He turned from the podium and began to walk at a calm and measured pace toward the large arched exit behind him. Mira and Tay turned in perfect unison and fell into step beside him. Their faces showed no emotion. Not anger, not fear, not defiance, nothing. The silence in the chamber was absolute for 3 full seconds. It was a deeper silence than before, heavy with disbelief. Then it broke. A wave of sound erupted. Shrill whistles of confusion from the Cygnians, angry sharp clicks from the Valerians, a deep grinding rumble from the Cathar section. The floating translator orbs darted around in a frenzy, their lights blinking erratically. No one had ever, in the thousands of years of the Concord's history, simply walked out. Kalen, the Valerian, shot to his feet. Human delegation, you will halt. You will respond. The humans did not halt. They did not slow their pace. They did not look back. A Cygnian voice, higher pitched now, called out, "This is an immense diplomatic insult. You will be isolated." The 3 figures continued walking, their footsteps echoing softly in the now chaotic hall. They reached the large archway. For a moment they were silhouetted against the brighter light of the corridor outside. Then they passed through it and were gone. The chamber did not quiet down. The empires were left alone with each other, their ultimatums hanging uselessly in the air, their power and their threats completely ignored. They had been prepared for anything except for nothing. They had been ready for a response, but they had received only a void. The human silence was now the most powerful presence in the room. The silence from Earth was absolute. For weeks, then months, the 3 great empires waited. Their diplomatic channels, which usually buzzed with threats, negotiations, and counteroffers, were met only with polite, automated responses from human systems. Your message has been received. Thank you for your communication. There was nothing else. No demands, no pleas, no explanations. The Valerian High Command was the first to grow impatient. They are hiding something, a senior commander insisted, his chitinous plates rattling with agitation. This silence is a screen for military preparation. They plan a surprise attack. A decision was made. They would send a probe, a small fast scout ship, to the border system the humans called Sanctuary. It was a system given to humanity in an old treaty, a place where they were permitted to have a colony. The Valerian scout, the swift verdict, dropped out of its jump at the edge of the Sanctuary system. Its sensors immediately came alive, painting a picture that confused its crew. They had expected to see a fledgling, poorly defended colony. Instead, their screens showed a heavily fortified orbital station. It was a massive, angular structure of dark metal, bristling with communication arrays and weapon emplacements that were unlike any Valerian design. It did not hail them. It simply sat there, silent and imposing. Scan for power signatures, the Valerian captain ordered. The readings came back high, very high. The station was powered up and ready. In the distance, they detected the clean, sharp energy signatures of human warships on patrol routes. The human vessels moved with a quiet, efficient grace. They did not broadcast their presence. They did not challenge the swift verdict. They simply went about their business, ignoring the intruder completely. The scout ship's report caused confusion back at Valerian command. The humans were not acting like a scared young species. They were acting like a well-established, confident power. Meanwhile, in a quiet, dimly lit room on a human listening post far from Earth, Mira watched the streams of data. She saw the Valerian scout arrive and leave. She saw the increased Cygnian sensor probes, disguised as long-range freighters, lingering at the edge of human space. She saw the strange, unmoving signatures of Cathar observatory ships which had not moved for months. "They are confused, Jin," she said, speaking into a comm unit. "The Valerians think we are preparing for war. The Cygnians are trying to figure out our economy. They are looking for weaknesses that are not there. On the bridge of the human flagship, the Indomitable, Commander Tay received the same reports. His officers waited for orders, for a message to send, for a challenge to issue. Tay gave none. "Maintain patrol patterns," he said, his voice calm and firm. "Do not engage. Do not communicate. Let them watch. Our silence is a weapon they have no defense against. They are fighting wars of information, and we have given them nothing to fight with." A junior officer, a young woman with a nervous look, asked, "Sir, what if they attack? What are our rules of engagement?" Tay turned his stern gaze toward her. "If they cross the line, we push them back. We do not explain. We do not threaten. We act." Weeks later, a different Valerian commander, one known for his aggression, decided to test the human resolve. He ordered a frigate, the Unyielding Blade, to cross the border into the Serenity system. It was a deliberate, slow incursion. The frigate's captain broadcast a standard Valerian challenge. "Unidentified human assets, state your purpose and allegiance." There was no answer. The human ships in the system, two sleek frigates of their own, continued their patrol as if the Valerian ship were not there. This infuriated the Valerian captain. He pushed his ship further in, heading toward a small human research outpost on a moon. Suddenly, the two human frigates changed course. They did not charge. They did not power up their obvious weapons. They moved with a swift, coordinated precision that was startling. They positioned themselves on either side of the Unyielding Blade. Then, a new energy signature appeared on the Valerian sensors. It was not a weapon lock. It was something else. A powerful, localized gravity field enveloped the Valerian frigate. The ship shuddered. Alarms blared as the artificial gravity and inertial dampeners struggled to compensate. The Valerian captain shouted orders, but his ship was no longer under his full control. The human ships were not pulling them. They were pushing. The gravity field was like an invisible giant hand, gently but irresistibly shoving the Unyielding Blade back the way it had come. The Valerian ship fired its engines at full power, but it was useless. The gravitational push was too strong. The human ships escorted them, silent and impassive, all the way back to the official border. The moment the Valerian ship crossed the line, the gravity field vanished. The human frigates immediately turned and resumed their patrol, without a single word, a single shot, or a single gloating message. The report from the Unyielding Blade caused an uproar in the Valerian High Command. They had not been attacked. They had been handled. It was a demonstration of technological superiority and tactical control that was deeply unsettling. They had no counter for an enemy that would not even talk to them. The Cygnians, who had monitored the entire event, were equally baffled. Their analysts crunched the numbers. The energy required for such a precise gravity manipulation was immense. The level of control was beyond current Cygnian technology. Their economic models began to fail. How do you trade with someone who does not speak? How do you negotiate a contract with a void? Their theories grew wild. Perhaps the humans had achieved a form of group consciousness. Perhaps they no longer needed to communicate externally. The silence was not a tactic. It was a state of being. This idea was in many ways more frightening than the gravity weapon. On the Indomitable, Tay allowed himself a small, grim smile when he heard the report. He looked at the star map, where the silent, watchful icons of human ships stood guard over the border. "They thought we were a simple puzzle to be solved," he said to his second-in-command. "They thought they could force us to choose a side. But we are not a puzzle. We are a mirror, and they do not like what they see in the reflection of our silence." Back on the listening post, Mira continued her work. She listened to the growing panic in the alien communications. The Valerians were building more warships. The Cygnians were imposing trade restrictions on each other out of suspicion. The Cathar remained unmoving, which somehow made them seem the most dangerous of all. She compiled her reports and sent them to Jin. The message was always the same. The silence was working. The empires were holding their breath, waiting for the other to make a mistake, waiting for humanity to make a sound, and as long as humanity refused to speak, the galaxy would remain frozen, trapped in a quiet, terrifying suspense of its own making. The human worlds were not a fortress of guns and shields. They were a fortress of quiet resolve, and its walls were growing higher every day. The silence stretched on, a heavy blanket smothering the usual noise of galactic politics. On the Valerian command ship, the Kittiness Will, the mood was tense. Commander Kalen stared at the tactical display. The human border was a solid, unblinking line of red. Reports from scouts were all the same. Human ships present, human defenses active, human communications silent. It is a trick, Kalen said, his voice a low rumble. They are hiding their weakness. They have no unified command. Their society has probably collapsed into chaos. This silence is the result of their failure. He believed this because the alternative, that it was a deliberate, unified strategy, was unacceptable. It would mean humanity was far more disciplined and dangerous than anyone had believed. He ordered a battle group, 3 frigates and a destroyer, to move to the border. They were to perform aggressive maneuvers, testing the human response. Let us see if their silence breaks when faced with real power, he declared. In the Cygnian hegemony, the approach was different but born from the same frustration. Their analysts presented report after report to the board of directors. The reports were full of complex economic models, all of them failing. You could not predict the market behavior of a trade partner who never placed an order. You could not assess the stability of a government that never issued a statement. A senior director, a being named Alara, watched the presentations with growing doubt. She was a scientist, not a merchant. She found the economic theories shallow. They were trying to fit a new, unknown element into old equations. It did not work. She decided to take a different path. Instead of looking at current data, which was non-existent, she looked at the past. She accessed old, unencrypted data streams from before the Great Silence. These were human cultural broadcasts, news reports, entertainment videos, historical documents. The data was chaotic and messy, full of human emotion and contradiction. She spent days sifting through it. She watched videos of human leaders giving speeches. She read translations of their ancient texts on war and philosophy. She saw patterns the analysts had missed. She found a story about an ancient human leader who was known for speaking very little, but when he acted, his actions were swift and final. She read about a concept called the silent treatment, a form of social pressure. She found a phrase, "Speak softly and carry a big stick." A theory began to form in her mind. It was not a comfortable theory. She requested a meeting with the board. The humans are not hiding chaos, she told the gathered directors. They are projecting power, a new kind of power. By refusing to speak, they refuse to play our game. They force us to guess their intentions, and when we guess, we always imagine the worst. We are building their weapons for them inside our own minds. Their silence is the weapon. It is making us afraid. The directors listened, but their large dark eyes showed skepticism. "A fascinating philosophical idea, Ilara," one said. "But it is not a practical strategy. How do we trade with a philosophy? How do we counter an idea?" Ilara had no answer that would satisfy them. Her report was filed away labeled, "Interesting but not actionable." The board returned to its failing economic models. Meanwhile, the Valerian battle group reached the border. They powered up their weapons and shields. They broadcast challenges on all frequencies. The silence from the human side was absolute. Then the human ships appeared. Not a battle group, but a single large cruiser. It was the Indomitable. It moved to a position directly between the Valerian ships and the human colony world they were approaching. It did not power up its obvious weapons. It did not raise its shields. It simply stopped, blocking the path. On the bridge of the Indomitable, Tay watched the Valerian ships on the main screen. His crew was tense, their hands ready over their controls. "Hold positions," Tay said, his voice calm. "Do not power weapons, wait." The Valerian commander was infuriated. The human ship's passivity was an insult. He ordered his destroyer to move closer, a clear threat. The Indomitable did not move. It was like a rock in a river. The Valerian destroyer was the water, forced to flow around it. Then something strange happened. A Cathar observatory ship, which had been sitting motionless near the border for months, suddenly activated its engines. It did not move toward the confrontation. Instead, it moved to a new position, as if getting a better view. It was a small, subtle action, but in the tense standoff it was deeply significant. The oldest and most mysterious empire was watching and learning. The Valerian commander saw the Cathar ship move. His paranoia spiked. Was this a human trick? Were the Cathar in league with them? Was this a trap? The simple silent presence of the Indomitable, combined with the movement of a third party, created a cloud of uncertainty that his aggressive tactics could not cut through. He had orders to test their resolve, not to start a war under unclear conditions. Grudgingly, he ordered his ships to stand down and retreat to a safe distance. The Indomitable remained in place for another hour, then turned slowly and moved back to its patrol route. Not a single word had been exchanged. When Kalen received the report, he slammed a clawed fist on his console. "They use our own minds against us," he roared. He was arriving at the same conclusion as Alara, but through anger, not study. The humans were not fighting with ships alone. They were fighting with psychology. The silence was no longer just confusing. It was actively dangerous. It was causing the empires to doubt themselves, to suspect each other, to see shadows where there were none. The human territory was not a place on a map. It was a state of mind, and it was a state of mind that was spreading, infecting the entire galaxy with a quiet, creeping fear. The empires were not just holding their breath. They were starting to choke on the silence. The pressure cooker of galactic politics, with its release valve welded shut by human silence, was beginning to strain. The empires had spent months staring at the dark, quiet mirror of human space, and the reflection they saw was their own paranoia. All it took was a single spark. The spark came from the Cathar. A large Cathar mining barge, the Stonecutter, was operating in a neutral asteroid belt that bordered Valerian space. The belt was a place of contested claims, but for years an uneasy truce had held. The Valerians, their nerves frayed from the human standoff, were jumpy. A patrol of 2 Valerian frigates, the Swift Talon and the Venomous Strike, detected the Stonecutter's energy signature. To the edgy Valerian commander, the barge's slow, lumbering path looked like a covert scanning operation. The Swift Talon moved to intercept. It broadcast a standard challenge. The Cathar barge, as was typical for its species, did not respond immediately. Their communication was slow, deliberate. The silence in this context was misinterpreted as defiance. "Power down your engines and prepare for boarding and inspection," the Valerian commander demanded. The Stonecutter continued its course. A minute passed, then 2. On the Valerian bridge, the commander's patience, thin to begin with, snapped. He ordered a warning shot to be fired across the barge's bow. The plasma bolt flashed brilliantly in the dark. It was meant to be a warning. But the Cathar barge, startled and slow to react, began a clumsy, evasive maneuver. To the Valerians, this clumsy move looked like an aggressive lunge. A junior officer panicked, shouted, "They're attacking!" A single nervous gunner on the Venomous Strike fired his laser battery. The shot was not authorized. It was a mistake. But it was a mistake that sliced into the Stonecutter's hull, tearing open a mining compartment and venting atmosphere and several Cathar miners into the void. The response was not slow this time. The Cathar did not believe in warning shots. From the asteroids, 2 Cathar defense vessels, which had been sitting powered down and disguised as rocks, activated. Their weapons were heavy, brutal, and designed for breaking apart asteroids. They opened fire on the Valerian frigates. The Swift Talon was vaporized in the first volley. The Venomous Strike was crippled, its engines dead, and it began to drift. The incident was over in less than a minute, but the galaxy erupted. The Valerian High Command declared it an unprovoked Cathar ambush. They pointed to the disguised warships as proof of premeditation. The Cathar Collective stated it was a defense of their civilian miners against a Valerian act of piracy. They pointed to the destroyed Stonecutter and the dead miners. Accusations flew across the galactic networks. The Cygnians, seeing an opportunity, condemned both sides for destabilizing the region and immediately imposed economic sanctions on Valerian shipping lanes, claiming it was for galactic stability. The Valerians saw this as Cygnian opportunism and a de facto alliance with the Cathar. Within days, a full-scale, if contained, war had broken out between the Valerian Star Commons and the Cathar Collective. Skirmishes flared along their shared border. The Cygnians, under the guise of peacekeeping, moved their own fleets into positions that conveniently threatened Valerian supply lines, and through it all, the human border remained perfectly, utterly silent. On the bridge of the Indomitable, Tay watched the reports of battles and political breakdowns scroll across his screen. His officers were stunned. The 3 great empires, who had been poised to crush humanity just months before, were now tearing each other apart. "It is exactly as Jin predicted," Tay said, his voice low. They could not tolerate the uncertainty. They needed an enemy they could understand. So they found one in each other. On her listening post, Mira monitored the chaotic communications. The airwaves were filled with Valerian battle cries. Cathar declarations of vengeance and Signian political maneuvering. The human silence was now a tiny quiet island in a raging storm of noise. She compiled her reports, her heart heavy with a strange mix of relief and sorrow. They were safe, but the galaxy was burning around them. The human government, hidden behind its wall of silence, watched and waited. There were no celebrations, no statements of triumph. There was only the grim understanding that their strategy had worked too well. They had not just defended themselves, they had inadvertently unleashed the pent-up aggression of the galaxy. The Valyrians, fighting a two-front Cold War with the Cathar and the Signians, suddenly found their military stretched thin. The grand fleet they had built to intimidate humanity was now desperately needed to protect their own core worlds. The Signians' economic models were in tatters, as war disrupted trade routes they had controlled for centuries. The Cathar, ancient and powerful, were slow to anger, but once angered, they were relentless and unforgiving. The war was not about humanity anymore. It was about old grudges, territorial disputes, and economic rivalry that had been festering for generations. Humanity's refusal to pick a side had removed the one thing that had kept these tensions in check: a common external threat. Without a common enemy, the empires turned on each other. The silence from human space was no longer just a defense. It had become a judgment. It was a constant, quiet reminder that while the advanced and powerful empires descended into chaos, the young and fragile humans had maintained their peace and their unity. The human worlds were a bastion of calm in a galaxy gone mad. The empires, who had demanded that humanity choose a master, had instead chosen their own destruction, all while the humans simply watched and waited and said nothing. The breath they had held was now a gasp of war, and humanity was not the one suffocating. A standard galactic year, marked by the orbit of a central galactic beacon, passed since the humans had walked out of the Concord chamber. In that time, the galaxy had changed. The brief, brutal war between the empires had ended not in victory, but in exhaustion. Borders had shifted, fleets were damaged, and economies were strained. A tense and fragile ceasefire was in place, but the trust was gone. The great empires were wounded, and they were weary. It was on the anniversary of that day that a single, unarmed ship appeared in neutral space. It was a human transport, small and plain. It carried no weapons, and its engine signature was set to a low, peaceful hum. It did not move toward any empire's territory. It simply drifted to a stop at the designated coordinates for open diplomatic discourse and powered down to station keeping. The ship was called the Quiet Resolve. On board were two people, Jin and Mira. They did not send a message. They did not request a meeting. They simply arrived and then they waited. The effect was instantaneous. The Valyrian Border Patrol was the first to detect them. The report shot up the chain of command to Kalen. His first thought was that it was a trick, a trap, but the ship was alone. He ordered a battle group to move to the edge of neutral space, but to go no further. They would watch. The Signians detected the ship minutes later. Their analysts scrambled. What did this mean? Was it a surrender? A declaration of war? Their economic models could not process the data. In frustration, a senior director remembered Ilara's report. They summoned her. You claim to understand them, they said. Explain this. Ilara looked at the sensor data. They are waiting for us, she said simply. They have made the first move by making no move at all. They are forcing us to come to them. Reluctantly and with great suspicion, the Signian leadership dispatched a diplomatic ship. It took up a position opposite the Valyrian battle group. Lastly, a Cathar vessel, heavy and stone-like, emerged from its silent vigil and moved to a point completing the rough triangle around the human ship. The three empires were together again, facing the humans, but this time the balance of power had shifted. A secure, multi-channel communication link was established. No video, only voice. The empires would not give the humans the satisfaction of seeing their faces. Kalen's voice was the first to crackle over the comm, sharp with anger and bruised pride. You have toyed with the stability of the galaxy for a full cycle. Your silence has caused immeasurable damage. You will explain yourselves now. There was a pause. Then Jin's voice came through. It was calm, clear, and firm. It was the first human voice any of them had heard in a year. You presented us with an ultimatum, Jin said, his words slow and deliberate. You told us to choose a master. You gave us a choice between 3 different forms of surrender. He paused, letting the memory of that day settle in the silent channel. Humanity chooses itself. The simple statement hung in the void, vast and unassailable. Mira's voice followed, softer, but no less certain. You mistook our silence for weakness. It was not. It was a choice. We were observing. We learned that your alliances are fragile. Your motives are transparent. You demand submission. We offer only this, coexistence. Jin spoke again. We will not join your empires. We will not be your vassals, but we are willing to open diplomatic and trade relations. We will do this as equals, not as subordinates. The silence from the other end of the comms was profound. The empires were caught completely off guard. They had expected pleading or arrogance or finally a declaration of war. They had not expected this quiet, confident statement of fact. They had no threats left to make. Their fleets were damaged from fighting each other. Their economies were weakened. The human worlds, by contrast, were untouched. Their defenses unbreached, their unity unbroken. The humans had not won a war. They had won without fighting. Alara, listening on the Cygnian channel, felt a chill. This was the big stick. The unspoken threat was not a specific weapon, but the proven strength of their will. Their silence had been the proof. Their words now were the offer of peace. Kalen wanted to rage. He wanted to order his ships to destroy the insolent little vessel. But he looked at his tactical display. The Cygnian ship was there. The Kethar ship was there. He could not attack without potentially starting another, even more disastrous conflict. The humans had placed themselves in the one spot where they were untouchable, protected by the very suspicion they had sown. After a long, heavy silence, a Cygnian voice, trying to sound reasonable, spoke. And what are the terms of this coexistence? The terms are simple, Jin replied. Respect for our borders, respect for our sovereignty, open and equal dialogue. The same terms we offer to you. It was a mirror of their own original arrogant demands, but reflected back with a dignity they had never afforded to humanity. The empires were left with no choice. To refuse was to admit they wanted slaves, not partners. To refuse was to return to the exhausting, self-destructive tension of the past year. They were weary. They were beaten. And they knew it. The communication ended. The human ship, the quiet resolve, powered up its engines. It turned slowly, and without another word, it began the journey home. The Valerian, Cygnian, and Cathar ships remained in place for a long time, staring at the empty space where it had been. The message was clear. The test was over. Humanity had not spoken because it had no need to. They had held their breath for a year, waiting for a scream or a surrender. What they received was a quiet, unshakable statement of fact. Humanity was here. They were strong, and they would not be ruled. The empires had held their breath, and in that long, silent year they had learned a terrifying truth. The most powerful voice in the galaxy was the one that refused to raise itself above a whisper.